And we are live.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to a virtual meeting of the City of Dublin Board of Zoning Appeals. The Ohio Legislature passed several emergency laws to address the pandemic, including the ability for public entities to have virtual meetings. We appreciate this ability to maintain our continuity of government. For the present time, we are holding our meetings online and live streaming those meetings on YouTube. You can access the live stream on the city's website. To submit any questions or comments during the meeting, please use the form under the streaming video on the city's website. These questions and comments will be relayed to the board by the meeting moderator. We want to accommodate public participation to the greatest extent possible and welcome your comments on cases. Please use a valid name and address when submitting your comments and refrain from making inappropriate comments. This is not a perfect system, but we will do our best during these ongoing difficult times, and we really appreciate your patience. So I'll call the meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals to order. And I'd like to begin here, really before we get into our meeting. I would like to respectfully share a moment of silence to honor the memory of our board member, Satya Goyal, who passed away in late May 2020. It was quite a shock to us. Mr. Goyal has been an avid volunteer and friend to the City of Dublin for years. He has served in many roles. He has volunteered for the Irish Festival, for 4th of July, for other events. He raised his 3 children here. He and his wife. He leaves behind 3 children, many grandchildren. It was just quite a shock. I myself heard of the loss by my neighbor, who was good friends with him on a personal level. But I feel, just in knowing Mr. Goyal and serving with him on the board, we were appointed in the same year, and he was always so pleasant, so extraordinarily nice, so helpful, and so interested in everything Dublin. He really was a big fan and a passionate supporter of the City of Dublin. So if anyone of the board members or anyone would like to add anything to that, before we begin, I will then take a pause, a moment of silence to honor his memory. All right, for a moment, please. He will be sorely missed by this board, by our community, by his family and his friends. And if everyone could aspire to be as dedicated to public service and volunteerism as he was, it'd be great. So, all right, well, we'll begin now with the roll call.
Ms. Herbert?
Here.
Miss Cooper?
Here.
Mr. Deschler?
Here.
Mr. Nye?
Here.
All right, now we'll have the acceptance of documents. Will there be a motion to accept the documents into the record?
I'll move.
I'll
Is
second.
there a second? Very good. Please call the vote.
Mr. Deschler?
Yes.
Mr. Nye?
Yes.
Ms. Herbert?
Yes.
Ms. Cooper?
Yes. Next, we'll have the approval of the meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the April 23rd, 2020 meeting minutes?
I'll move.
I'll second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Nye?
Yes.
Mr. Deschler?
Yes.
Ms. Cooper?
Yes,
Ms. Herbert?
Yes.
very good. Now tonight we have one case. The case is titled Smith Residence. It is case number 20-101V. The address is 5588 Capelstone Lane, and this is for a non-use area variance. Is the applicant present for this case?
Yes.
Oh, very good.
Sorry, technology.
That's okay. Okay, so anyone intending to address the board will need to raise their right hand and answer in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to this board?
Yes.
Very good. Okay. Our presenter tonight is not, it was originally scheduled to be Zach Poundshell, but instead we'll have Claudia.
Yes, Zach also had a emergency with his family, so I am taking over, so bear with me. Can you see my presentation on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as you introduced this, Mrs. Cooper, this is a variance request for the Smith residence for a non-use area variance. The site is located on the north side of Capelstone Lane, and it also backs up to Dublinshire Drive. It was platted in 1992. And I just lost power.
Ooh.
Okay.
Well, we can
what do
still
you-
see it
what can
on
you
the
see?
screen. We
What
can
can-
see the site, the aerial
Okay.
view of the site
Okay.
with a yellow outline.
Okay, perfect. I'll keep going, I guess. 1992. So the fence code, as we had outlined in our staff report, was amended in the year 2000. So after this neighborhood came into existence, and the fence code in 2000 ultimately changed that you can no longer have now a fence on the property line. It so happens that the neighbor of the Smith family does have a fence on the property line, which is considered non-conforming, and the request is to tie the new fence in with the existing fence. So on this slide, you can see on lot 7 is the existing fence. The Smith residence is on lot 6, and the required side yard setback would be 5 feet there on the on that particular site that the variance request is being made. We've looked into this, obviously, as you saw in your staff report. We've looked at the criteria and have not been able to find that the variance criteria would be met with this request. So based on the standards that we have, the 3 and then the 4, we are recommending disapproval of this request because it is an action by the applicant. There are different ways that this could be avoided. Though the request is understandable, there are still rules in place today that the applicant can actually meet. So that's why we are, as a staff, recommending disapproval of this variance request. And then I can answer any question, and obviously the applicants are here as well to answer any questions or explain more details about their request.
Do any of the board members have any questions of the staff on this?
Claudia, in the statement of the property owner, he indicates that Mike Kettler at the city stated that the purpose of this 5-foot setback is to restrict the footprint so that neighborhoods have the aesthetic of open yards and no obstructions. Do you have a response to that aesthetic argument as it relates to this property?
Certainly, every single lot in the city has setback requirements, whether it's 5 feet or 7 feet or 6 feet. That certainly is the case for all of the lots in the city to keep open yards in place. I think it's more the aesthetic argument is more in regards to why the fence code changed in 2000, and that really was an action from the city council deliberately to keep yards open. So maybe it's not the setback in and of itself that keeps that aesthetic, but it is what can be within the setback or close to the setback.
Now, the setback, the neighbor's property is on the property line. So they are
Fence
not,
is, yeah.
they are right on the line. And the request is to attach to that fence rather than having a 5-foot pass through. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Are they are meeting the setbacks at the back?
Yes.
Claudia, are you aware if there's been other requests like this in the past? I mean, obviously, if the code changed, it's not that long ago. Are there other fences that are still in existence that you're aware of that have been granted such an approval to tie into them?
Really not to my knowledge. I mean, we do have them still in place. Obviously, 2000 was 20 years ago. So some of them have just not maintained well either. And might have been removed or have been removed. We do get this request occasionally, mainly because of the rules having changed. But to my knowledge, I could not recall one that the board has granted in recent years.
And if the neighbors in lot 7, I'll call it that, if their fence became in disrepair and needed replaced, would they have to follow the same requirement? Would they have to then have the 5-foot setback?
So our nonconformity rule is 25%. So if some boards fell down and repairs needed to be made, they would be allowed to do that, but they would not be allowed to take the entire fence down and replace it with a different fence or a new fence in its place.
Okay, or if a new homeowner came in and wanted to remove the fence attachment and say put a new fence in, they could not put it on the property line, correct?
Correct.
I didn't have any further questions for the city at this time.
I do
Hey,
not have-
Claudia, it's Jason.
Okay.
Can you, just real quick, just want to make sure, are you aware of the conversations that the applicants have had with the city and what other options were provided or given to them?
Yeah, in the conversation with Mike Kettler, who would be staff member that is issuing fence permits, I know Mr. Smith and he had talked about applying for a permit that would meet the code as an understanding that the 5 feet is a requirement. And Mr. Smith, if you have something else to add, because I wasn't obviously part of those conversations, just following up on your email chain, that's how I understood the conversations went with Mike.
Yeah, you're correct. He indicated that the fence plan I had originally submitted could not be approved and that I would need to resubmit, leaving a 5-foot gap to the neighboring fence.
And it appears from in the applicant statement, the last picture, it looks like there might be a utility right-of-way that runs along there. Is that possible? It runs near the fence line there?
To my knowledge, oh, please go ahead.
No, I'm not aware of that, but I can check here real quick.
If you're referring to the highlighted section, that was just added for just to depict the area to you, the 5
No, at the bottom of the picture, the two
Oh.
utility boxes that are right there, it looks like if it were to run, usually they run on property lines. It looks like it would run, if it was going backwards from there to towards the back of the property, it would go straight back that line.
So there was nothing visible on our plat indicating that there was any right of way or easement.
Yeah, if there is, it would likely be a private utility because we don't show anything on our public system.
Martha, do you have any questions?
I don't think I have any questions for staff at this time. I may, though, have questions. I was actually just going back to the first part of the exhibit to see how the lot backs up onto the woods at Dublinshire or onto Dublinshire Drive, and kind of looking at that as well. It is a very deep lot. All right. We have no more questions for staff. I'll allow the applicants to present if they have anything they'd like to present or add to the for the board's benefit to their position on this application for variance.
Sure, if we could just really briefly, I think, address some of what was discussed in I don't know what it's, the recommendation from staff. First, I'd just like to start, thank you for this opportunity to allow us to discuss our request for a variance. Certainly our thoughts are with Zach and hope everything is okay with his family, but we do appreciate you taking the time to hear from us. Like everybody that asks for a fence, I'm sure, our main concern is safety for our daughter, our toddler, safety for our pets, and obviously privacy. As we stated in our filing, that the 5-foot setback creates a gap that basically would be unsightly and hard to maintain. It would also be inviting for people to cut through our property from Dublinshire. You can see in the photo we submitted that it lines up with a clearing on Dublinshire. So it would create you can reasonably infer that would create an inviting path for people on Dublinshire to assume that is property they could cross. In the short time we've actually been living on this property, we have had that happen already without even that path being separated by 2 different fences 5 foot apart. So obviously, looking at the code, it appears that we qualified under B as you needed to meet 2 of the 4. So our hangups here with section A, just wanted to address that briefly. In section A1, the staff stated that we did not meet the criteria because, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, that we can build a fence. We physically can build a fence. We can physically do it with a 5-foot gap. We could physically build a fence. It is possible on this property, but we cannot build that gap build the fence without the 5-foot gap. We physically cannot build the fence without that occurring because of our neighbor's fence that is on the property line. And by that occurring, as I previously stated, that will cause a reduce to our privacy and safety and encourage people to cut across our property. Additionally, this board has approved other variances where people could physically build the structure that they wanted to build, just couldn't build it their desired way without the variance. And I would direct your attention to 20-050V, the Bog residence, where they could build a pool on their property, but to build it in the way they wanted, they couldn't do it without the variance. So we're just making a similar argument and looking for a similar determination from this board as was in that case. Additionally, with A2, basically, and again, I'm paraphrasing this, staff said that the criteria was not met because the fence is not required for residential properties. Again, this board has approved other variances for structures that are not required for residential property. And I would direct your attention to 20-065B, the Carpenter property, which was a variance for a garage. Obviously, garages are not, are not required for residential properties. Again, I cite the same, we have a very high-strung dog, which is also why we need the fence.
Oops.
But so I would also cite again that box property pools are of course not essential for residential property. And unlike these other instances where variances were given, our variance would actually enhance what is the purpose of the requirement, or at least what we were told was the purpose of the requirement of creating an open aesthetic. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with the request for this variance. And I don't know if it's a distinction without a difference, but in terms of tying into our neighbor's fence, our plan is to actually build our fence to meet theirs, not actually tie into it. So we shouldn't have any issues of needing to get onto their property to maintain our portion of the fence. So there shouldn't be any issues with that. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
I think that pretty much covers it.
So that's basically what we wanted to state, and we are happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you. Do any board members have questions for the applicants?
Are your neighbors supportive of the fence? Have you discussed it with them since you'll be meeting with their fence?
Yes, we have discussed with them and they have no concerns.
They said they were with us in solidarity tonight, in fact.
I had another question about, you said there was some condition at Dublinshire or some feature that made it look like it was a pass through to your yard. What was that again?
So yeah, if you look, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I just didn't notice that when I drove by, but I didn't look, to be honest, at the Dublinshire side. I just drove past your house.
If you look at the pictures that we included with our filing, especially the ones where we kind of mapped out where the 5 foot would be, you can see that the trees kind of clear at the end of our property.
Oh,
And
yeah.
unfortunately, they clear, and those are not our trees. Those are the trees on the city easement. So unfortunately, they clear right where this 5 foot path would be, which I think it's reasonable to infer then that people will see that as a 5 foot public property path that they could cross. And like I said, we've had incidents where that's happened already, and we aren't even creating the illusion of a public right of way there. But creating this 5 foot gap will create the illusion of a public right of way and causes us concern about privacy and safety.
How are you own that area back there, correct?
Yeah, our property extends nearly to Dublinshire Road.
So you have the ability to plant additional trees between the fence and the easement, the rear easement for more privacy.
We certainly could plant trees on our property. I don't have in front of me right now how much of that is the city's property and where we could plant trees. Certainly the option to plant trees is always possible on our property, but I think even trees there, you're still creating an illusion of a public right of way by having this 5 foot path between these two properties coming off of Dublinshire. And actually on Dublinshire, there is decorative hedging that also ends kind of at the end of our yard as well. And that is outside of our domain to address.
On the other side of your house, though, there's no fence on your property or the other person's property.
That's correct.
That's correct. And we do intend to adhere to the 5-foot setback on that side.
So this clearing at Dublin Shire, that's not on your property.
I believe part of that is our neighbor's property where that opens out.
I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily realistic to plant additional trees in a heavily wooded and shaded area. I mean, I'm not even sure, would that even take?
Yeah, I agree with that.
And even when, even with additional trees, it looks a lot more open, obviously, when there's not full foliage. So in the winter, even with additional trees, you would still see that there's this like faux pathway between the two properties.
Hey, real quick, Claudia, what is the intention? I mean, is the intention to really have the 5-foot gap between the fences? I mean, where else does that exist in the city on areas where there's fences? It seems, honestly, seems questionable from my perspective here.
I would say that partially the intent is to discourage fences, period. I think in terms of making those rules and having homes, not like the Smith's house, but there are certainly homes in Dublin that are extending to all the setbacks and the fence could be 5 feet or something like that. And who would want to do that? Nobody. So if this was today, there would be then technically a 10-foot gap in between the fences. If the neighbor didn't have already built a home with a fence, then you would have at least a 10-foot gap in between those. And the 5 feet is the shorter of the two setbacks. So it has to be 5 on one side and 7 on the other to get a total of the 12.
Or they
Yes.
could do it the reverse. They could have a 7-foot setback on that side and only a 5-foot setback on the other side.
Correct.
To facilitate, for instance, mowing, et cetera, in that
Correct.
lane.
Correct. Yeah, and in general, we do get a lot of those inquiries about fences where people don't have any yet. And once they understand where you could have one, that's really where the discouraging factor kind of comes in, because sometimes people are just saying, well, if I can only have it in this limited amount of space, I won't pursue it.
Well, this is a large lot in this case, so there's still going to be a very ample fenced-in area, even if you have to accommodate the setback under the fence rule that was adopted in 2000.
And I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm permitted to speak right now, but Claudia, state that our property is kind of unique and that the purpose of these rules is to discourage fences, but our property is a little bit unique, and you've pointed out a couple times, it's very deep, it's very wooded, there still would be a large wooded area. So I think that also kind of supports our argument for the variance in this case, is that it is kind of a unique property and kind of a unique circumstance where we're not taking away from these fencing requirements in any way by granting this variance.
Any more questions from any board members?
No.
I'm good.
No.
Mr. Nye?
No, I said no, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, good. All right. Is there any discussion, any further discussion or any questions of the board of the staff based on the comments made by the applicant?
I guess we're just going to talk. I mean, I think the 2 points of contention are obviously 1 and 2, special conditions, applicant action and inaction. I'm struggling because I don't personally find the city's criteria not met, the reasons persuasive. We have looked in the past to when we have looked at the special conditions, according to my recollection of 4+ years on the board, historical, maybe pre-code requirements or conditions of the property. And if you look at the code, also looks to adjoining property. And if you look at the fencing purpose and scope under the fences in the zoning code, it mentions the purpose and scope is assurance of safety and security, improvement of the visual environment, neat and orderly appearance. Those types of things go into the intent of fences. And, you know, if we're gonna require 5 feet on one side and then the other side for the historical property or the historical fence is up on the property line, I mean, that visually, it would look terrible, frankly. You know, there is a clear walkway to Dublin Shire. I would be concerned about that as well from a safety security perspective. So that's just my thought on the first one. The second one, applicant action and inaction. I do agree with the applicant. When I read this, you know, every variance we get, you could just not build a garage, or you could not build a house that looks like Frank Lloyd Wright, and you could have windows that meet the code requirements. You know, just from some historical meetings I know that the current board has been involved in. So that in particular is not persuasive to me. They certainly didn't build that historic fence. I'm imagining they would not be seeking this if the neighboring fence was 5 feet into their property as well, because that gives a very easy to maintain 10-foot area for both property owners. So those are just my thoughts on those two provisions.
Any other board member have some discussion or response?
You know, when thinking about it, it's if the other fence wasn't there, it probably, this is a non-issue, right? The problem is that other fence is there, and it doesn't even look like, I mean, it's not going to be a similar type of fence. And I agree, Sarah, aesthetically, it'll look horrendous if there's a gap there. You know, my concern is that is this unique enough, this instance, to be able to not have some effect that will allow multiple other homeowners to climb onto this decision with regard to the fences.
Well, I thought about that too, Jason, and I didn't notice where any of those other property, of course, I didn't go, you know, survey the properties where at least this neighborhood had that issue. We haven't had this issue come up in my 4.5 years on the board. I mean, I thought about that as well, but how many historic fences that are still up after 20 years after the code has changed, you know, and they've maintained it. If you're going to replace a fence that's over 20 years old, you're probably replacing more than 25% of it. And then you have to comply with the new code requirements.
I mean, I'm with Jason. I'm stuck on the first one. That's the problem, is this basically then just circumvents the entire purpose of this and says anyone that has a fence built pre-2000, their neighbor can then abut that fence, right? I mean, that's basically what we'd be saying.
I think we have an opportunity to look at the unique circumstances of the properties. And in particular, if we might be considering, like, what's the thoroughfare? What's the, what are the other aesthetics around that property? Is there enough uniqueness about that property that we are not seeing a reoccurring? Yes, we have the right, or we have the authority to grant a variance if we find that the criteria have been met. But I am concerned in this case, because of the large size, they're really not hemmed in. So I don't want to, sound difficult on this particularly, but you have a very large lot that you are going to be able to fence. And I guess maybe one of the options would be is to make it 7 foot on that side and 5 foot on the other. Is there a reason why that won't work?
Speak right now.
So I'm not sure if we're allowed to speak to that right now.
Yes.
Please.
So one of the things that you might notice from the images of our property is, even though it is a large lot, there's actually very little of our back lot that has grass and is able for us to have as kind of a play area for our toddler and our dog. So I know you comment that it's a large lot and we have a lot of area that we can fence in, but most of that is woods.
And actually, there's the 90-foot no build zone as well.
Right. There is a 90-foot no build zone off of the back of that property. So
I'm sorry, couldn't hear you.
sorry, there's a 90-foot no build zone off the back of the property from Dublin Shire as well. So I think by adhering to a 7-foot setback on that one side rather than a 5-foot setback, we're even further kind of contracting on the grassy area of our yard and creating even more of a narrow space on that side. And that is the side of the house that actually has access to the front of our yard. And that is kind of our main thoroughfare from getting from our garage area back into our backyard. So on the other side of the house, it's actually very complete line of trees on the other side of the house, and it's densely wooded along the other side of the house. So we're really narrowing our area.
Is the fence going to be 73 feet by 75 feet?
Yes. Most of that area.
That's a pretty enormous area. Especially for in a city. I think that's a pretty large lot that you're going to be able to fence in. Because then it looks like there's still another 90 feet after that.
Extending to the back, to the rear.
That's the no build zone.
Right, but you're able to go 73 feet back.
Yes, we are. I'm not arguing that it's a large lot or a deep lot, but most of it is wooded, and we're not able to cut down any of those trees back there to create more of a grassy yard area within that fenced in space. We're pretty limited in where we can actually grow grass within our yard, and that's why part of the reason why we're seeking this variance, trying to maximize the space that we have near our home.
As opposed to taking out some of your own trees.
We're not allowed to.
You're not allowed to take out any trees.
Correct. Yeah, unless they pose some kind of hazard. We're not allowed to cut down trees on our property.
Is that a deed restriction on your property?
Yes.
But you are able to trim them, correct?
Yeah, we're able to maintain the trees, yes.
Or trim them up, thin them out.
I think the struggle for me is not whether I personally think it would look better, because I think the answer to that's really easy. Whether I think it makes sense to have the code the way it is, but it's whether or not, if our job is to look at these and say, are these criteria met? I'm struggling getting there. Is the problem I'm having.
Right. I think I would argue that there's enough uniqueness to our property to not make this some recurring request that would be brought in front of this board. I think that most properties in Dublin are not similar to ours, and there's enough for this board to point out that is unique to our property as to why a variance would have been granted.
I mean, and I tend to agree with the homeowner on this, as well as when I look at the purpose and intent of the fence code, as well as the variance, where variance code, in terms of maintaining the intent and spirit of the code, when you look to the intent of the code for fences, I think that, given the historical neighboring property fence line, and also in fact, that fence to me looked like it was very well maintained, actually. Am I right in that? It looks very well maintained, at least.
Yes,
from
it is well
what I can
maintained.
see. So I would approve the variance.
Now, if I may, the existing fence that's there goes farther back than you're proposing.
It does. They built all the way out to the no build zone.
Well, I am having difficulty with the request for variance in this case because of the fact that there is so much space around you, so much privacy with the easement, your no build zone all being listed. I understand you're not wanting to create a preferential path, but I don't really think that's going to happen given the density of the lot.
It's already happened even without creating the faux walkway. We've had
People cutting through from Dublin Shire into our neighborhood.
already.
But they don't just cut through you, they cut through the neighbor at lot 6, they cut through other places if they're coming from Dublin Shire up to the neighborhood. Because that neighborhood's a gated community, and so they aren't going all the way around to the front, they're going.
It's not really a gated community. There's just some kind of, at the entrance, the appearance of gates, but it's not a gated community.
Well, I didn't mean there was a guard on it.
Right, they walk the fence line, and I think the thought then is if you create this odd and, as we've discussed throughout this meeting, unique situation where you have 5 feet between two fences, I think that's only going to encourage that behavior even more.
And whether it's 5 feet or 7 feet, I think, regardless, it's creating this pathway from Dublin Shire into our neighborhood.
Yeah, one of the struggles I have with that is if you and your neighbor were both now trying to build it, there'd be a 10-foot gap. So it's actually, it actually should be a bigger gap. And so technically, if your neighbor wants to take their fence down tomorrow, there would be a 5-foot or 7-foot gap there anyway. So that gap would be just recreated on their property. So that's one of the struggles. I'm trying to find a way to get there.
My understanding of the Ohio fence law is that by building it on the property line, it is now joint property. So if he wanted to take down that fence, they would need to get our approval for the fence that is built on the property line.
I'm not sure that would override the deed restrictions or in your homeowners association or the Dublin requirements. So, I mean, it might be a general fence law.
I don't think the deed restrictions talk about that, do they? It would just be, that would be outside the deed
Or
restrictions.
the type of fence that it put in. I mean, I think that would perhaps control more.
So we are keeping within the deed restrictions as far as the type of fence and the height of the fence and all of that. The deed restrictions don't indicate, who owns a fence when it's built along the property line.
I don't think that deed restrictions can also go against the law. Also, if it's joint property under Ohio law, that would supersede any HOA, because you can't obviously contract or create HOA requirements that go against Ohio law. There's a supremacy there.
Right, correct. But
okay,
I just don't see that I'm not sure that I can see where you would have a good argument to make that they need your permission to move the fence. To say, let's say they decide to replace the fence with a different fence, then they have to comply with the Dublin fence law. Now they will have a 5-foot setback.
But that's exactly my point, though. by it being Ohio fence law and it is now joint property, they cannot move it without our authority. So if he decides that he wants to tear down the rest of his fence, he's certainly within his right to do that. However, the portion of the fence that's built along the property line, they would need our consent to remove that portion. So if we are granted this variance and we build up to this fence, and then some future owner next door decides to remove their fence, then they can remove everything except what's on the property line.
So if the fence became more than 25% in disrepair, you're saying that the city of Dublin could not tell them they have to replace it based on their own code?
I'm not sure I understand that question, Joe.
Well,
If
he just
it's
said that
more
they
than
could move.
25% in disrepair, the
That's what
Dublin
Claudia
would
said.
not. Yeah, what was the end of it though? I didn't hear
So
it.
there's one piece that's on their property, and then there is obviously the rest of it is on other properties. So more than 25% of the fence is not abutting their property. So if, say, the entire back of it was in disrepair, it would be greater than 25% in disrepair, and Dublin would say you would then have to replace it. I don't think the one piece that's on their property would control the Dublin code, and Dublin could say you have to replace, say, 75%. Yeah, they could say you have to replace all of it.
I think there's an argument to be made that the portion that's on the property line would not be considered as solely their fence and shouldn't be factored into that overall percentage.
When I practiced zoning law years ago, there was a lot of cases about fences that fall on property lines, particularly in areas like, a good example is German Village, and joint maintenance and who can tear them down. And so I think there's definitely something to that. Obviously, if more than 25% of that particular fence fell into disrepair and they wanted to replace it all at once, it's clear that they would have to move it back, right? Or at least that portion of that fence, right? Okay, so for example, Claudia, if the left side of the fence was the one that's in disrepair and correction of that side is more than 25% of the whole fence, is Dublin then going to make them rip down the right side of the fence and move it back?
We would consider the fence in its entirety to be 100%. So whatever needs replacement or repair, the neighbors could do 25% of the entirety of the fence. If it happens to be that the fence that is on the joint property line is constituting 25%, we would allow them to repair that in its place.
What if that's the only side that doesn't need repaired? Would you then still make them move that side?
I think we would not make them move that side, because one of the nonconformity issues is that you cannot increase the amount of nonconformity. So we would have them move whatever new pieces are in the allowable locations, if that makes sense. I know nonconformity is a tough one.
Yeah. Particularly with fences.
Yes.
Martha, how you looking here? What are you thinking?
Well, I'm trying not to split hairs is what I'm trying not to do. And I'm just concerned that they have not met how about the rest of the board? I understand where Sarah's at. Where are you, Jason?
Looking at these photos, aesthetically, it's not going to look the best. But I don't think aesthetics. I know Sarah read some of the provisions, but aesthetics doesn't come into play with the code section that we're being asked to evaluate, unfortunately.
However, unique circumstances to the property do.
Sure, they do, and I think there's been some good ones that have been presented, and I don't like the cut through. But then when I think if there's somebody's cutting through, then that issue can be jointly presented by the homeowners to the HOA, and then something can be done on the common area potentially. Or if there's issues with cutting through and it's on an easement area, then they can request assistance from the city to be able to block something if it appears that that's an issue. I have people cut through my yard all the time. There's a bike path that's behind me. So it's up to me to make that decision. If I like it, if I don't like it. So I don't know. I'm unfortunately, I think I'm leaning on a no here. I'm just worried about the precedent, but I'm not saying it's full yet. I can be convinced.
Aaron, I have another question for you.
Oh,
You were left alone to the technology. You got it.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So the last picture on your statement where there's the two utility boxes, is that the view from the road? It has the red that you guys put in.
So no, the view from the road is a little bit more obstructed. One of the photos kind of higher up within our statement shows the view from the street.
The front view one?
Yes.
But I guess Jason, I want to go back to your point with this one. It says it's extremely limited view from the front. Which angle is it you're saying that people would see that gap? Because I'm looking right here. There's no way I could see that gap from there. And there's also 2 3 or 4 foot tall utility boxes in my line of sight if I was looking straight back per that last picture. So I don't know you would even see down there that much. You see what I'm saying, Jason?
Yeah, no, I do. I'm just going off what the applicant's saying is that there's people cutting through. It's probably more akin to when there's not full foliage on some of the trees. So I mean, Joe, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking I can't find a uniqueness to it that gets me to a yes. I'm still trying to not be kind of like Marty said. I don't want to pick it apart too much, but I'm just not seeing the people cutting through property as a unique feature. Somebody having a fence built on a property line is not a unique feature to me. These are just not. I mean, I think those are legitimate arguments, but I keep going back to what I keep flipping between is it's a circumstance that's peculiar to the land or structure involved, which is not applicable to any other lands or structures in the same zoning district. I can't imagine there's no other land in the zoning district where someone cuts through. Marty just pointed out that the neighbor's house is one. I just, to me, if your neighbor has the same thing, then that kind of defeats the whole, you have this peculiar, unique situation. That's where I'm stuck. I'm just trying to find,
well, it's giving as one of the examples by reason of the property immediately adjoining in question. I mean, it's looking to the adjoining property, and we have granted variances in the past based on historic characteristics of property, many of which I can't remember the guy's name. He was an architect, but he had that historic property down past Shire Rings. If anyone else was on the board at that point in time, and had several variances that he requested.
About the heights of his building.
Yeah, the heights of his building.
That was a very unique circumstance because of the Washington Township versus City of
Yeah,
Dublin.
that had that, but we've had other ones with historic, and that's just that one happens to be. I remember that one because I drive by that house all the time.
I am aware that a variance has been granted for this kind of a circumstance where there was an existing fence on the property and the adjacent property owner wanted to attach, and it was granted in a split decision by the board. One of the things about that, though, was the proximity of the school to the property and the just steady stream of kids cutting through there was really the issue. And that was well documented. And there was no setback, there was no variance granted for the rear setback, but it wasn't, the exposure was quite prevalent. So this is where I'm splitting hairs a bit, because I agree that this property presents unique circumstances, but just its very size, the depth, the foliage, the location of the back, I just am struggling with seeing how it's keep creating a preferential pathway. And that's where I'm kind of stuck, and I don't like being stuck there. But
you're saying if their assertion that this was a preferential pathway is more well documented, then it gets you there closer, or at least. So that's really the hairs we're splitting here.
Yeah, kind of.
Well, that one's more well documented, and here we just have their statement of the homeowner. I mean, we don't have pictures, video, log of all the people walking across their property from Dublinshire, which is a very busy road.
It is a
very
busy
thoroughfare.
property.
And it's close to the school, and they're walking to, isn't this Wyandotte and the pool, like all that's in that area?
Yes.
Yeah.
However, again, the access, because of the depth of the setback and the wooded nature of it, it is not, and not to say that it couldn't become, but it is not really lending itself to a preferential pathway. So that's where I'm struggling with this, because we have been very, as a board in general, we have been very consistent on these new fence requirements. Albeit, I am usually
I might also want to take a moment to remind you all, with there being 4 of you, it would take a 3-to-1 vote to approve or deny anything, because if you're doing 2 and 2, then the motion would not be in favor. Yeah.
And in that case, we'd have to wait until our new Board of Zoning member was initiated.
So we could table it, I guess.
Are you saying a 2-2 is a no, right?
That's what I'm saying, yes.
Okay. So they gotta get 3. They gotta get 3 votes for yes.
So if
3 votes for yes or 3 votes for no, that's for sure.
Well, I think two votes for no is the same as 3 votes. It just, you have to have 3 yeses or it doesn't pass. If I'm understanding Claudia.
Yeah,
The
you're
only
right.
options are 3 yeses, 4 yeses, or it doesn't pass.
2 yeses and it doesn't pass.
Correct. That's my understanding.
You're
Claudia's
correct.
saying yes.
But if it was tabled and additional evidence or whatnot was generated to potentially go towards some of these special conditions, we could wait until a future BZA member is able to opine.
Certainly. I mean, the applicant is always able to request.
If we vote, and Claudia, just to give them a heads up, if it's a no, then they're prohibited from applying for another year for this particular variance. Is that correct?
I don't think that's correct.
They
I
could,
think it is. I think
it
there's
is correct.
I think
Okay,
there's a restriction for reapplying.
for 12
Yeah.
months. Okay, okay.
So I think one of the things we're telling you is if you choose to, at this point, withdraw your application and give us more information, you have
Or-
the ability to potentially
Or
come back
table it. Table it.
2 months. Yeah, table it and present more information. If you choose to not do that, it currently, I think the way it stands, looks like you are going to.
You
not
only have
get
one yes.
it. Yeah, you have one yes.
I guess I'm struggling to see where we're gonna be able to provide more information to this board. It's gonna get us to a 3 yeses, whether today or whether in 2 months. You know,
I mean, what I'll tell you is if you had the other homeowner there, we could ask questions too. That can't hurt you. If you provide information, perhaps from your board of your HOA,
Homeowners Association. Yeah.
indicating that there is an understanding that people cut through your yard and it's awareness, that could
Or
be
your
beneficial
neighbor
to you.
could talk about that if
Or
they've
your
been
neighbor,
there for
right?
a while.
Well, I already mentioned the neighbor. I mentioned that was first. So, I mean, that's what I would do. Not to
Yeah,
say that it's
I
going to
mean,
be a
it'd be
guarantee, but I mean, I think it would certainly not hurt from that
Yeah, I
perspective.
mean, as Jason said, it would be persuasive for me I don't know where it ends up because I don't know what they're going to say, but if you had a HOA member, if you had the neighbor both there at a meeting and we could ask them questions about some of these things, I think it may provide a different perspective.
I don't want to delay this anymore.
Does the HOA, your documentation mention anything about fences out of curiosity?
yeah, they indicate the size and the type of fence, indicating. So I believe Dublin fence requirement is 4 feet, and our HOA is 3.5 feet. Needs to be an open fence type. That type of thing indicates what we can build.
So the fence that you're proposing is very similar to the one that's currently in existence there.
Yeah, it would match his same style.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's shown on the last page of his stuff.
Okay.
It's that split rail, natural wood, and you
Right.
can put chicken wire. It's pretty common.
I think one of my issues is though, I think what we won't know the detrimental effects of the 5-foot gap until we've unfortunately been left with the 5-foot gap. I think it's, from the experience that we've had of people cutting through in the past, and obviously we're all reasonable people who can make inferences about how this is going to look and how people are going to perceive that from just living in the world and living in Dublin, that is going to look like a public pathway, but I'm not going to be able to provide you with statistical data that 5 people a day are going to cut through it because it doesn't exist yet. So I think that's part of my concern is I think this is always going to be a conversation that happens in hypotheticals, but I think that's also not the only argument for why our particular variance is unique that we've made here tonight as well as in our filing.
And I think that Jason and Joe, I'm not speaking for them, but what I got from what they said was if you had additional information, maybe from the HOA or your neighbor who's obviously lived, you guys just moved there last year, right? So they may have more information about that particular point. Is that right, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like just to have some additional background, historical knowledge.
Yeah,
It would in my opinion, it would bolster their position of we're looking at a safety issue, and that creates the unique situation in this instance rather than aesthetic. I mean, aesthetic, it's out. I mean, it's just not going to happen. They can't meet the requirement. But if we're going to present this unique safety issue based on their property location, that it may get me there.
And I agree. And I have already said that I'm just not seeing it, even though there may be some people who come the corner of that lot, that 90-foot area or that back area, they are not near the school. They are not near the pool, and they are the closest thing really is the church. So it's uniquely located just past John Tim there on the right. And I've been there many, many times, friends on both of those corners on Dublin Shire and John Tim. So I'm just not seeing that pathway that is going to be conducive to becoming a thoroughfare. I just think that that's one of the lovely things about your wooded lot and the setback in the back and the area that's not yours, the no build zone and the other area, is that it's really private and it is not something that is readily traversed, if you will. But that's how I saw it when I went by it, and that's how I kind of view. That's why I'm in with Jason on this, as far as if you could bring in some information about this as a problem. Because the one other time that I participated in a situation where the owner applicant wanted to connect to an existing fence was exactly that. There was a lot of documentation. The location was not only on a main thoroughfare, but the backdrop, the depth of the lot was very small, or not very small, but much, much smaller than yours. The area being fenced, the potential area for being fenced was much smaller, and they had pictures to show that it was being used as a cut through. So that's where I'm struggling, because we are very, try to be very consistent about upholding the intent of the fence requirements for the city of Dublin. And I guess that's where I'm at. So if you want to take the opportunity to talk to neighbors and, bring in some more people to talk about it, or talk to the homeowners association representative, I am glad to support your decision to have the matter tabled. And if you just want a decision, I understand that as well. And if I could wave my magic wand and make it all perfect for everyone, I would, but this is where we are. So.
Well, don't waste your time on the fence. Go with the pandemic if you have a magic wand.
Yeah.
Thank you for that opportunity. We really appreciate you letting us know what kind of information would be helpful. Obviously, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and this house we're struggling with childcare issues. So I think knowing what we are saying, I think we're just looking for a resolution this evening. But we certainly appreciate that you'd be willing to consider more information. But I think at this point we need to move on to the next event, which is bedtime.
All right. Well, do any other board members have any questions or concerns, or wish to add anything for the good of the order and the record?
No, thank you.
No.
All right. So let me slip down into my agenda because I had all my pictures up. We'll conclude the public comments and entertain a motion to approve the variance to the zoning code to allow, or from the zoning code to allow 2 sections of fence to encroach into the required 5-foot side yard setback. Is there such a motion?
I mean, I'd make a motion, but no one would second it. So I think you mean disapprove, don't you? Disapprove? You said approve.
Motion to disapprove. Thank you for correcting.
I mean, real quick, I mean, Aaron, is that the case that you'd rather be rejected tonight than come back in a month or 2 months with additional evidence? And that's fine if you are.
So
It's just-
I guess I just don't see it as realistic to gather the kind of evidence that this board is looking for at this time.
I mean,
So-
I don't think we're looking, can't speak for them, but corroborating evidence about this being a pass-through or, that type of thing. Is that what you're looking for, Jason and Joe? I mean, beyond their just the homeowner's representation, you want some corroborating discussion about that. In a month or two, you'll have one more, board member who knows what he or she will think about this, whether you'd convince Martha, Jason, or Joe. But if we disapprove it now, then your chance is done.
For a year.
Well, where you just build your fence and. And that's the end of it. So, but.
I'm not certain what I'm specifically looking for, but I know it's more than a self-serving homeowner statement, to be honest with you. I'm going to need something else.
It is just part of our requirements. We have to have follow the rule and demonstrate.
We have an obligation to satisfy the code here, and it's not satisfied. It could be, but it's not currently. And so if you have other homeowners that you want, or somebody from your HOA board to bring forth, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, it can be, it's not, you can get a statement, although I would want to ask questions, but
right.
We're trying to help you out from that perspective, because,
I understand.
it's going to be rejected if you go forward. So.
Sure. And I understand that. I guess I'm, questioning whether, having the next door neighbor also provide some anecdotal evidence that, yeah, he's seen people cut through here before. I guess I just question whether that's really going to be sufficient for this board to then find in our favor. And, I don't know that we're really going to be able to provide more hard evidence that people cut through our property in the next month or two.
No, I mean, I understand what you're saying. And I think the one point that you may have glossed over that Sarah mentioned is at the next meeting, there may be another board member. Okay. And that other board member could be in your favor. So they're whereby bringing the other homeowner or somebody else to bring evidence could convince, Joe or me or Martha that you met the standard, and the new member, would have a fresh look on it. So, that's the other perspective that you may want to take on this. But if you're interested, if you have the fence contractor ready to go and you're just waiting for the line of where it's going to be, then right now you're going to have to have that setback.
I understand. If this is tabled for this evening, is it automatically then renewed for the next meeting, or do I need to submit again for the variance and pay the fee once again?
You would not have to do those things. You would just provide additional information if you were to have additional information, so you wouldn't have to pay the fee. We would just take the same number and the same documentation that you provided forward.
With his additional documentation, so
Correct.
It can be included in the record. You would just send them your additional documentation, or have your homeowners, your neighbor, whomever, also attend the meeting.
And if we have a new board member, we might repeat going over some things at the public hearing for the benefit of the new board member, so that they have the benefit of discussions like we have had tonight. So
I do
there
want
might
to
be
caution you all on that particular subject, because council is on their summer break, and they are not meeting again officially until the 27th of July. They just met on Monday and they are on summer break now. So I am not sure whether or not they would have interviews, but they would not be able to appoint a new member until the earliest, the 27th of July.
Well,
Does, Claudia, does
that
the,
means August, right?
so does the applicant, could the applicant choose to wait until there's a fifth member? Like how-
Certainly.
Okay,
Yeah, he's not
So
automatically
then-
kicked to the next month.
right.
He's, yeah.
you can choose.
No, we
Aaron,
would
the
obviously
question
work on the
is,
schedule.
when did you wanna put the fence up?
Well, next week.
Okay,
So I'm on a week of vacation for work coming up, and I was planning to get this done. So we're not looking to, continue kicking this down the road. Unfortunately, it's something that we want to get up for the safety of our, pets and child. So
Well, I'm sorry we couldn't get you there because I certainly was supportive.
Appreciate it.
yeah, we appreciate that.
I am sympathetic as well, but at this point, if you are not interested in tabling, I totally respect that as well. And sometimes we have very difficult decisions that have to be made that we may feel personally that it's difficult, but from a legal perspective and from the criteria and from the position of taking a hard, strict look at our fence law, I am not in the position to make a motion to approve the variance as is. So if there was a motion to approve and you want to proceed with the vote, that's fine. Otherwise, I think I will be looking for a motion to disapprove the variance request and adopt the position of the staff on this.
Can I ask a question? I don't have the language in front of me. It was discussed tonight that in terms of aesthetic, people kind of agreed with that argument. The 5 foot would obviously be terrible. Is the language that you're referring to when you talk about aesthetic and safety, et cetera, is it an and or an or? Because if it's an or, you could make the decision based just on that aesthetic criteria alone. And I don't have it in front of me. I wish I did. But if it's an and, then I understand the predicament.
So when I was looking at this, which I went to the fence portion of the zoning code, which has the requirements for fences, I was citing the intent and purpose as stated in the code for fences, which involves conservation and protection of the property, the assurance of safety and security, the enhancement of privacy, and the improvement of the visual appearance, which includes the provision of neat and orderly appearance, etc. And then you go down to the variance section, which says that in granting any variance, the BZA shall prescribe appropriate conditions and safeguards to maintain the intent and the spirit of the zoning code. So we have typically looked to what was the intent of that portion of the code. Most recently, we looked to when we granted an application related to shutters on windows and the appearance of those was because those shutter or window requirements related to subdivisions, and this particular home was built along the river, not in a subdivision, just as an example of a recent case that I can remember. So that's what I was pointing to. And I agree. I think it would look absolutely horrible. I don't have a fence, but I do have a lot of cross traffic in my backyard as I'm close to a bike path with 3 small children. So I'm not documenting all of those either, but they happen. So I don't see it as self-serving. I see it as just a statement of fact. That's a concern. And I don't live on a Dublin Shire type thoroughfare. So that's why I found it convincing, particularly and very unconvincing from the city on the reasons that special conditions were not met. or the applicant action inaction, because, you know, applicants can always decide not to build a Frank Lloyd Wright home or a garage or an addition on their garage or a pool. You know, but you don't have anything to do with your neighbor having a fence that's right on the property line. That's a historic condition of the property. So, and again, we are to look at the adjoining property owners when looking at special conditions.
So I don't want to
Unless
get
that
all
answers your
Neil,
question.
yeah, and I don't want to get all Neil Gorsuch contextual on you, but like to me, when you read that, it's talking about the spirit of the code. And so if the purpose of it's acknowledging the purposes of fences are for safety and this aesthetic and continuing this aesthetic Dublin that we all know and love. And if we're supposed to adhere to the spirit of this code, I think that simply the fact that this 5 foot would create this terribly unsightly, in contrast to the desired aesthetic, is sufficient for this board to grant the variance, even if you're not convinced on the safety argument, because that is the whole, the code acknowledges that there are purposes for fences, and adhering to the spirit of the code then allows for variances whenever the spirit of that code is not met, I guess is the argument.
I mean, and I agree with you, and we've certainly made decisions based on that. We're not, that's why we have a Board of Zoning Appeals, is to be kind of a checks and balances, or a second look, or, you know, having community members involved in these decisions, because we also live in the community. I think it would be very unsightly and difficult to maintain. So I agree with you.
I appreciate your concerns on your pass through, but where I am struggling isn't that you had action or inaction, but in number 2, but of the first 3 where you have to have all 3 criteria, I just think that the special conditions are not significant to the uniqueness of this property. And that's where I'm struggling with it. I just think that that criteria has not been met. You can still meet your zoning requirements. You can build the fence in 5 feet or 6 feet or 7 feet or a lot of configurations and not involve the neighboring fence. And that's where I'm struggling. And
wait, are you, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Are you saying under 231 H2A, you're saying she has to meet all A, B, and C?
Under 153.231 H2, you have to meet A, 1, 2, and 3.
So
all 3.
So it's really just the A1 that you had the struggle with, which was the special conditions, because A2 is the inaction action. I just want to clarify. I'm sorry, because
yes, well, that
okay.
I have a little easier time getting past A2 or A2 than I do with A1. A1 is
Right,
where
okay.
I'm having my difficulty.
And here where, I mean, that says special conditions or circumstances may include, and that's where it gives you some examples, but those aren't exhaustive, but yet they still reference adjoining properties. And I'm sure you would recall, we've looked to historical characteristics in those special conditions. We've certainly done that in the past, quite a bit, I might say.
I think if we want to go back to the aesthetic piece real quick, anybody that would have to build a fence like that is going to have that aesthetic issue, right? So that's common to anybody that's going to want this condition.
Right.
So that's where the precedential treatment of this case is going to impact other cases down the line. There has to be something more. That's how I'm looking at it. I mean, it kind of feels like we're going around in circles. I'm ready to have a vote. That's my take.
I am too. I feel like we've covered these topics, and I think it's down to the 2 options of, do you want to table it or get a vote? And I would ask that we take a vote at this point.
All right. In accordance with the agenda, is there a motion to either approve or to, I guess I should say it this way. Is there a motion to approve the denial of the variance as recommended by the staff? Or would
Is
you
that the way that's
prefer
gonna be
for me
read?
to say it?
I mean, I think it needs to be, I'll move to disapprove the
Okay,
variance.
It would be
request.
clearer that way, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
all right. So we have a motion to disapprove the variance request. Do I have a second on the motion?
I second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Deschler,
Yes.
Miss Herbert,
No.
Miss Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Nye.
Yes.
All right, thank you. That concludes this case. I very sympathetic, and I apologize that we weren't able to come to the decision you had requested and approve this variance. And if you don't proceed with the fence, I welcome you to come back in within or after the time period required. And other than that, I wish you luck and safety. And if I find my magic wand, I'll be working on that COVID thing.
Understood.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much.
Thank
Thank
guys.
you for your participation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
All right, back to our agenda. I think we're about ready to wrap up. The date of our next hearing is July 23rd. And as pointed out, council's gone till July 27th. So it seems like we won't have a new board member for the July meeting if there is one. Is there any other communications issues for the board?
No, we do not have anything else.
All right, well, thank you all for participating, and we'll see everybody on July 23rd if an application is submitted. If no application is submitted, our next meeting after that will be in August. Watch the email and also watch the alerts on whether we'll be live and in person or if we'll continue with the virtual. And thank
Definitely.
you. Happy 4th of July, everyone, and stay
Thanks.
safe.
Thanks, Mike.
Hi, guys.
Give Maria a chance to turn the stream off, okay?